All right.
First thing is we'd like to know what your name is, where you were born, and when you were born.
Okay. My name is Herbert S. Jack, and I was born in Dayton, Ohio, in November the 27th, 1922.
Okay, did you go to school and grow up there?
Oh, yes. We went all the way through school in high school, that is, and played in a band in high school, and that's where I met my wife. We both played in the band, and we got acquainted at that point. Graduated from high school in 1941, and then we married in 1942. Of course, uh, the Pearl Harbor was in 1941, and we knew after that that I'd probably have to go to the service, and I we thought had a hard time deciding whether to get married first or wait till after, and we didn't know how long. Nobody knew how long that war would last in any by any means, and so we decided to go ahead and get married, and hopefully the war wouldn't last too long, and we could have our family after that. But I was drafted. Of course, Pearl Harbor was December the 7th, and I was drafted in the service in January. Following January, I had turned 20 in November, and then Pearl Harbor in December, and drafted in January, and sent to St. Louis and Jefferson Barracks for basic training, and 6 weeks of that, why they sent us up to Spokane, Washington, Geiger Field, and put us in the Aviation Engineers, which, like I say, is the counterpart or the uh, Air Force di- division, I guess you'd call it, of the Seabees. We were a construction battalion, and we were not supposed to get into any combat of any kind, but we of course had to carry weapons and so forth.
One thing I was going to ask you is you went in basically this kind of unit. What were your skills and what got you into this particular outfit?
Frankly, I don't know, except I could type, and that's how I got into the office, and as started out as orderly room clerk, and then uh, the the fellow that was company clerk at headquarters office, uh, he uh, he applied for OCS, and he got shipped out back to Australia to become an officer, and I got his job, and of course, in those days we were T5s. That was which is a level of like a corporal. But then when the other crews began, the other soldiers began shipping back to the United States after the war was over, well, I kept getting promoted almost every week. And I ended up as tech sergeant. So I was, I wished I'd been made that a few months sooner because the pay was quite a bit different. But yeah, I was uh, head of the office at that time when I got discharged.
How did you happen to know how to type?
Oh, I took that in school, in high school, and also I took a few months of business school after I got out of high school. But that's the only upper grades that I had. Well, we stayed in Geiger Field about 6 weeks. Of course, when I was shipped there, I didn't know how long we were going to have to stay there, and my wife followed me out there. It was very, very interesting. Uh, she was only 19 at the time, and she got on the train. Of course, they didn't have too much air commercial air service in those days, so she followed me up to Spokane, Washington, on the train. And she had a little experience at that time. She was in a what do they call them? A lounge car, I guess, and was sitting there reading, and several gentlemen came in and sat down near her on the train, and uh, she didn't know who they were, of course, but they began to talk to her and got kind of friendly, and she thought maybe they were just kind of flirting or something, but they were just friendly gentlemen. And one man who sat right next to her uh, asked her, about me and what I was doing and where I was serving, and she noticed on his briefcase it was HJK actually on the initials on the briefcase. Turned out to be Henry J. Kaiser. That was really a good experience for her. And then of course she we found a place to stay in Spokane, Washington, and we when I'd get off on Sundays, we'd walk around the town and we'd look for houses that had what were they? I can't remember exactly what the symbol was now, but it indicated that they had a son in the service, and people would put that on their front window. And we found a house there, and sure enough, we got a room. But of course, I only got off on the weekends, and Geiger Field was about 5 or 10 miles, I think, out from the town. And so, like I say, we were only there about six weeks or so, and we were informed that we were going to ship out. And so she went ahead and traveled down to San Francisco and Oakland, and we shipped out from Geiger Field and stopped in Wendover. Now, Wendover was a town that was right on the border of Utah and Nevada, and had an air base there. And our air base was in Utah actually, and we'd go over the line on the weekend to gamble, of course, in Nevada and drink. But and we had some pretty rowdy times there too. But we only stayed there about 2 weeks at the maximum, and then went down to, I think it was Richmond in San Francisco, near San Francisco, and there was a base there. And then we shipped out from there in June of 1943, and we were on a Navy, no, it was a cruise ship, I think, that had been converted to a Navy transport. And it was a pretty fast ship. Of course, we left in the dark of night out through the Golden Gate and headed for Sydney, Australia. We didn't know where we were going, but we headed for Sydney, Australia. No escort, whatever. No Navy destroyers or anything. We just took right off and headed for Sydney. It took 16 days to get to Sydney, Australia, and then they quartered us into a hospital that had just been built, and it wasn't even in use yet. And so we stayed there for several weeks and got to visit Sydney, Australia several times, and then we were shipped up to New Guinea, Port Moresby, New Guinea. And our job there was to build a B-29 airstrip. And of course, in those days, they built airstrips out of these steel perforated planks that were about 10 feet long, I think, 12 feet maybe. And they linked together, laid down. And we laid, 6 layers. We put a layer of steel planks and then a layer of blacktop macadam, and another layer of steel planks, and another layer, 6 planks and 6 layers of macadam. And that was the first B-29 airstrip in the South Pacific. And, well, let's see, we started in, I guess it was July or August to build that strip, and took us about 6 months to build it. And we heard later that the war had advanced during that time so much that there never was a B-29 landed on that strip. So we, on Christmas Eve of 1943, we were advised that we were going to ship over the hump, which was up to Lae or Nadzab in New Guinea, which is on the north side of New Guinea. And we were to fly up there on Christmas Day. And some of us were fortunate enough to be able to get into they were C-47 planes. And for Christmas Eve in 1943, I slept in between the pilot and co-pilot's seats on the floor of this C-47. And that was the great Christmas we had in 1943. So then we set up camp at Nadzab on the north side of New Guinea, Papua. In those days, the southern part or the east part of New Guinea was called Papua, and I think it still is. The north side of New Guinea was called Dutch New Guinea in those days. It's now called Indonesia. And I don't know how that happened actually, but I was company clerk at that point. I finally got promoted to company clerk, and we built a trailer. We had these skilled engineers and carpenters and plumbers and electricians and all these capable men. They built a headquarters trailer for us to have the office in. And they made the mistake of, when they built this, of putting storage for all the paper up on top. And when we left Nadzab, New Guinea, they pulled this trailer down the side of the mountain, and it was so top heavy, it flipped over and we lost everything. that was a real snafu. You've heard a lot about snafus, I presume. And while we were in there at Nadzab, we built the headquarters, not the headquarters, but the living quarters for General Kinney. He was the head of the 5th Air Force in those days, and we built a really nice house for him with hardwood floors, screened-in porches. Didn't have air conditioning, but it had a lot of fans. And our boys in the outfit were living in tents, of course. And at that time, we were pretty good living situation. But they were still upset at the expense and money that had been spent on building a home for General Kinney. And they all got ticked off about it. And so our outfit became known as the outfit that canceled all their war bonds. They were everybody was getting deductions out of their pay every month. So much of their deduction went to buying war bonds, and they got so ticked off they all canceled it. We got wrote up in some of the publications because the whole battalion canceled all their war bonds, and I think some of them took them out again later on. But
How long did he live in that?
I have no idea, because we built it and within a few weeks we shipped out. But I don't think he moved in before we moved out, before we shipped out. So I never got to see him or anything like that. But it was really a very, very nice house. From Nadzab, we went to Hollandia. We were on the invasion of Hollandia on D-Day, of course, and we figured we'd be in for a big battle there, and we might get into it, but it didn't turn out that the Japs had had evacuated and got run back in the hills and got away. So there were only a few snipers left when we got to the beaches. And the funny thing was they'd send over their uh, little planes to drop cluster bombs in those days. They I don't know if you've seen or heard about cluster bombs, but they come maybe 20 or 30 or maybe 50 in a cluster, and they're bound up, and they something explodes and breaks them all up about 100 or 200 feet off the ground, and they go out and kill people by spreading all over the area. And so our particular outfit unloaded some LSTs, and at nighttime, while we told to camp up on the hill, and we moved up there on the hill and dug some slit trenches, we called them, foxholes, and we found out that we were in a banana grove, and so we were scared to death of tarantulas, of course, and so we had been issued hammocks, which had screen netting on them, and so most of us hooked up these screen nettings and stretched them between the banana trees and slept in those for the night. And during the middle of the night, we called him Washing Machine Charlie. That was a Jap plane. It'd come over. It'd be put, 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 put deal. And we'd get a air raid signal, 3 shots up in the air, and that signalized that there was a plane somewhere around. And nobody ever even bothered to get into their foxhole or slit trench until we heard the plane. And when we'd hear the plane go put, 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 and he'd jump in the foxhole. And so we were sleeping away, and most of us going back to sleep again after we heard the air raid alarm. And all of a sudden we hear this put, 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 and he's really close. And most of us got back in our foxholes. And next morning, come out, we found one guy had the fox or the hammock with a screen netting on had zippers on the side, one along the bottom and one along the side. And one guy had got out of his mosquito netting on the other side. We don't know how he ever did it, but he missed unzipping the mosquito netting, and we all had a big laugh about that. Then we shipped from Hollandia up to the island of New Guinea is shaped like a turkey. If you ever noticed on the map, we were right on the head of the turkey, a little town called Sansapor, which was 8 miles south of the equator. Really hot place. And actually, I don't know what we were doing up there. We cleaned off and built an airstrip. We did do that. But I don't know if that was ever used or not. Mostly when they saw us coming in New Guinea and they'd see this big convoy of ships moving in, especially there in Hollandia, why, they'd just take off for the hills. And in one instance there in Hollandia, some of the boys, I heard about it, I didn't see it, but the Japs had a hospital, and in a cave. And after they were gone and took off, the boys went into this cave and found they had just shot the nurses and left them lay there. They carried nurses and women around with them in their different bases they set up around the South Pacific. They had a lot of nurses and women, and but when they had to run, why they just leave the dead bodies.
Were these
Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. And like I say, that's hearsay on my part. I didn't experience any of it actually, but you pretty well hear the truth when you're right there, you know. I didn't care to go in and see it, but oh,
When you were building the airfields, you mentioned it took about 6 months or so to build this one B-29 strip.
mhm.
Were you going in having to clear the whole jungle and create
Oh yeah.
these airfields? What was the process?
In most instances, yeah, we had to clear first, but we also hired, I guess they hired and paid natives. Back in those days, they were called fuzzy wuzzies in New Guinea, and we hired them. But there was a women that did the work primarily, and on one occasion, the men would sit around and watch the women work. And one occasion, we had a pregnant girl working there, and she worked for days and days, weeks actually, and all the time she was pregnant. And one day she took off from work and disappeared. Nobody knew where she went. She came back with a baby on her back and went back to work. It was only gone a few hours or so. You know, she had this baby herself out in the jungle. We built, airstrips and bunkers around the airplanes to protect them from bomb shrapnel and so forth. And one of our members, one of our sergeants actually, he was driving a jeep down the airstrip, and I don't know why he couldn't hear it, but there was a plane pulled up almost right behind him, and he was in the jeep, and he looked around and suddenly saw this plane coming at him, and of course he took off like as fast as he could, but it caused him to lose his mind, and he was shipped out. Section 8, we called it in those days. He got a Section 8 discharge for mental disability, I guess you could call it today. And but there's a lot of little stories that I can't even remember now. But but then again, we had another experience where they picked two companies, A and B company. I was in B company, and they shipped us down the coast for about 20 miles, and we were in LSTs, or I don't remember exactly what you call them, LST or LCT, something like that. And they unloaded on this shore, and we were to build an airstrip, and we had one D6, they called it, bulldozer, and we managed to get that in on the shore, but there was a reef out there that stopped us, and the ocean was about 3 or 4 feet deep at that point. But so we had to wade into the shore, and then we were going to build an airstrip. Well, the reef was a big problem, it turned out, and we had to end up building a jetty out to that point. It was about 100 feet, I think. And during that time, we were there about 4 or 5 days, and we never got any rations shipped down to us or delivered to us. And so a couple of us went out and started looking for wild pigs. They had wild hogs all around the island at that point, and we were going to get us a hog and eat it, of course. And this friend of mine and we were out looking and never saw a wild hog. Finally, in desperation, he says, I'm gonna shoot down that coconut up there. He says, I got to have something to eat. And by golly, the coconut tree was maybe 100 feet over from us. Oh, maybe not that far, 50 feet or at least. And we were both standing here, and he shot that coconut, and you can't, it's hard to believe, but actually it flew up and came back and hit him right on the head. It was, we both had helmets on, fortunately. But I laughed, but he was really mad about it. But anyhow, we had some coconut to eat and drink, and frankly, I've never been able to eat coconut since that time because we practically lived on coconut for about 3 days there, and that's all we had. And finally, we got relieved. But that was the 5th Air Force in those days, and I don't recall how the Air Force and the Air Corps interchanged. I don't remember the details on that. But when we got to uh, the Philippines and landed in Leyte, we were attached to the 7th Fleet at that time. We were in the Navy. So like I say, our outfit was kind of independent, or what you might call I called it a bastard outfit because we really had no parent until we were close to some particular outfit that could supply rations and so forth. And so we were actually in the Navy there for about 6 months, and I don't know, maybe that's the reason I got a good fast ship on the way home.
Was there a lot of, kind of rivalry or competition between the Army, Navy, Air Corps guys, or things like that?
Not a whole lot that I experienced in any way. Uh, oh, they razzed each other quite a bit, and I don't remember. We never had any fights with them or anything like that.
It sounded like there wasn't a lot of knowledge about what the Navy was doing until you got in there to Leyte with the planes and everything like that.
Well, that's true. We had no connection whatever with the Navy except for the transports. You know, they transported us from San Francisco to Sydney, Australia, and that's the only connection we ever had. And there was never any problem. I think there was at least 5,000 troops on that ship going from San Francisco, and I never heard of any trouble with the Navy. We were all in it together, you know. I personally didn't see any problems anywhere, but there could have been, I suppose.
Were you pretty nervous with going overseas without any escort at all?
We were at first, yeah, when we first left. It seems like when the ships leave the harbor, it's always rough, and the seas are rough at that point. But then it smooths out and gets smooth as you get farther out you get. And I never got seasick myself, but almost when we left Sydney Harbor going up to New Guinea, well, that was really a rough spell there, and we had some awful guys get awful sick going out of that Sydney Harbor. But no escort. No, we didn't even have an escort going from Sydney to New Guinea. Uh, we stopped in Townsville on the way up there. I don't know why, but we were allowed to get off the ship and go around Townsville. That's a quaint Australian town. Looks like one of our old western towns where they have these buildings, wooden buildings like we see them in Colorado, where it looks like the old West, you know, with porches on the front, and that was Townsville in those days. I haven't heard much about that in recent years. I don't know whether the town still exists or not, but we went from there up to Port Moresby, and we built quite a camp there. The one other fella and I, we found some empty oil barrels, about drums, you know, and then we found a little kind of a 2x4 shack. It was maybe, I call it 2x4, but it was maybe about 6 feet by 10 feet. And we set this whole shack right up on these barrels, and we lived in there. We set our cots up in this little shack, and we had the best quarters of anybody in the outfit, really. The rest of them were sleeping. They did have cots, army cots, and they were sleeping on those, but they had dirt floors, and it was real jungle those days. Uh, we had a day off one time, and a couple of us fellas went up to uh, see Rona Falls. It was up about 10 or 12 miles from where we camped, and we just went up there to see what it was all about, but we couldn't even get close to it because the jungle was so thick, the rainforest. Well, it wasn't really rainforest at that point. Rainforest, in my opinion, is a lot of tall trees that interlock over the top, and you get a real high humidity down below, and you have. I did go through a couple of rainforests while we were over in New Guinea, and we visited a native. What do they call them? I can't. My mind is failing me now, but I call them cannibals, I guess. Fuzzy was. They were headhunters, and we visited their camp. They were friendly, but they knew they couldn't mess with American troops, or they'd be in big trouble. But
Didn't they give the Japanese quite a bit of problems?
yeah, they did. They did. Yeah, they didn't get along well at all with the Japanese, and we didn't. We weren't. We didn't get the privilege, I guess you might call it, of seeing any of their heads that they had they had shrunk. But I know they did. They captured or killed quite a few Japs in there. But I guess things pretty much changed today. They're much more educated, and I've got pictures of this camp we were in. Camp, I call it. I can't. Village, I guess, is what would be the right terminology. And then we shipped to Leyte, and we were on the invasion of Leyte Island, and we were to repair the airstrip on Tacloban, the little city that was right in. I think it's the capital. It's the capital of Leyte, and we were repairing the airstrip, and we got to work on that almost immediately. Of course, during that battle, the Navy planes were sinking Jap ships, and they were all. There was a tremendous air battle. You probably heard about that, and they were coming and landing on our airstrip because their ship had been sunk, and so the Navy planes, some of them had to land on our airstrip, and some of our artillerymen were shooting at these planes because they thought they were Jap planes. We didn't have any experience at that time with Navy planes, and so little Filipino kids hanging around, they said, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, them's our plane." And we always thought that was quite an experience.
Tacloban, you said you lost some of your men there. Was that the snipers or?
No, what happened? We were heading further inland. Tacloban was pretty close to the shore, and for some reason they had decided to ship us inland, and we were, of course, we had all this heavy equipment. We had bulldozers, road graders, and earth movers, and that's what we had to ride on, or else march. And of course, we'd move faster if we rode on some of this equipment. Well, at one point they stopped us and they said, "We got to leave the equipment here and move the rest of the men up farther." And so we marched up. Now, of course, broken file and not in formation at all, but we marched up farther, and all of a sudden we stopped because we could hear rifle fire, gunfire, and Well, when we stopped, they said, "You better dig in. We're getting close to the front." And sure enough, about that time, several planes come over and were firing down in front of us, and it must have been really close because the clips from the ammunition of the airplanes were dropping down on us, and so we were pretty worried about uh, spending the night there because the Japs have a habit of infiltrating during the night, and so we dug in and slept in foxholes that night. What sleeping we did do wasn't hardly any of us that really slept, but the Japs had penetrated beyond us, back to where our equipment was, and that's where the boys got killed that were out there sleeping on the equipment. They were supposed to be guarding it, but they thought they were far enough back they wouldn't have any problem. But we lost four men there, and some of them were pretty good friends. But that's how that happened. Yeah. Then we went back to Cloven and worked more on the airstrip there. And there were a lot of Jap planes that came in. Actually, one of them was loaded with paratroopers. I figured they were because they crashed on the strip, and they had to be cleaned up, all the bodies and so forth. And they had a crew of black men that had that job to clean up the dead bodies. And we used to, of course, they were all Japs, and we all supposed to have hated the Japs in those days, of course, naturally. And so those black fellows, they didn't care much about picking up the bodies, and putting them on the back of a truck. So they'd tie a wire around the foot or a leg or arm or something and drag them up over the back, And I never will forget this one black guy. The body caught on the edge of the tailgate of the truck, Come on up here. Come on. Don't get up here with your buddies. He said. Don't you want to be with the rest of your buddies up here? No, they had some experiences. I especially treasure that one experience of those little Filipino boys telling us, don't shoot those planes. Those are our planes. Our boys didn't recognize them. Of course, during the stress of all that excitement and battling and fighting, all that was going on all around us at that time.
Wonder if those Navy pilots ever knew that some of those young Filipino children saved their lives.
I imagine they did hear about it. Yeah, I imagine they heard about it. Like I was saying, this one experience where I went to chapel, and Lou Ayres was the speaker at our Sunday morning church service. And a Jap plane came over during that service. And we all jumped and got under the benches, except Lou Ayres. He stood up there and never moved. We were surprised at that because he was touted to be a big coward, and had been a conscientious objector.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, we didn't have the camera rolling when you were talking about that earlier, and a lot of people can be seeing this don't even know who Lou Ayres is, so why don't you try to explain?
Lou Ayres, well, he was a movie star who played Dr. Kildare. He was the original Dr. Kildare in movies. Richard Chamberlain later became that part. Actually, there was another guy who played that part too. Can't think of him. He's a red-haired, tall guy. Can't think of his name right now. But Lou Ayres played Dr. Kildare, and that was quite a movie series. One of the first doctor and hospital series that they had, and he was well liked, very well liked movie star. And of course, when the war came along, why he joined the conscientious objectors, and they still drafted him, I guess, and put him mostly in the medical corps, and they had to take care of the wounded, and they went actually into battle and were shot at on many occasions, and they picked up the dead and the wounded, and like I say, uh, I don't know what denomination of religion he had, but he did preach at our church services. Whenever we'd move from one place to another, we usually build a chapel. We used to hire the Filipino, well, I guess they were workmen, and they built frames for us to put our tents over, build them out of bamboo, and they used electrical wire. I don't know where they got all the wire, but they used electrical wire to tie it together. A lot of people don't know that bamboo grows to that large a diameter. And they'd split it in strips and make a floor for us. And of course, use the larger size bamboo to make posts, and our pyramidal tents would fit right over the top. And we had pretty decent living quarters then at that time. But normally we'd just have a dirt floor. We were on shore and working when MacArthur returned, and that was the day he said, "I have returned." This was his big occasion. Of course, he lived for that moment. And we all did, actually. So the Filipinos did too. So we spent several months there in Tacloban and had a little combat experience, and we lost about 4 of our men at that time. And then we were shipped to Manila, and we were stationed in a movie studio, actually, in a suburb of Manila called San Francisco del Monte. And it was raining to beat the band when we got Manila, and I had to crawl on top of one of our heavy trucks, and I think San Francisco del Monte was about 10 miles out of Manila, and as the truck pulled into the parking lot, the place was all mud, raining to beat the band, and I crawled underneath the truck to get some rest. It was about midnight or maybe later, 2 o'clock in the morning. And as I woke up the next morning, somehow or another, there was a bottle, like a whiskey bottle, laying right next to the wheel of this truck. And I looked on the whiskey bottle, and it said, "Whiskey flavored cane alcohol." Let's see, from then on, we stayed there till, we had been about 20, 25, 26, 20, 28 months, I guess, overseas that time with no break of any kind. And a lot of our boys were getting very depressed. And it was in July or August, the last part of July and the first part of August, that we had 4 of our boys in our outfit commit suicide. They thought they'd never get home. There was no break in it. It looked like the war would last forever, and we were due to be shipped to Japan. And it was only about a week after the last guy that committed suicide, the atom bomb was dropped. And of course, we knew that would be probably the end of the war. And it was a really terrible shame that these boys, gave up so soon. But that was the attitude of a lot of outfits that had been overseas for 2 years or more, and no break, and no, didn't look like we'd ever get home at that time. So there was a lot of depression.
You're talking about being overseas for so long and the depression. Do you think that the military learned and later, so in Korea and other times, they put them in R&R at times?
Oh yes, I had a lot of fellows that just couldn't take it. You know, the stress of battle, and of course we weren't really in not much battle, but it was still stressful. Stressful. You never knew from day to day what was going to happen really, and they could. We hear about the real heavy battles like Iwo Jima and things like that, and we fortunately we didn't get into that, but still we never knew from time to time what would happen. But I had a unique experience there too when after the Japs surrendered and we were we had a certain number of points, we were allowed to go home. My was really good buddy of mine. He had a couple more points than I had, and he shipped out on a freighter, a slow freighter. Well, it turned out about a week later, or a couple weeks later, I got my enough points to go home too, and I got a fast Navy ship. And I got all the way back to Dayton, Ohio, and I checked with his family to see if he's home yet. They said, no, we're expecting him tomorrow on a plane at Patterson Field in Dayton, Ohio. And they said he should be in about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I went out to the airport and met him. And he couldn't believe it because he'd left at least a week before I left. So that's about the whole story. A lot of other details I left out, but you can't cover everything 100%. Well, my father put in lawn sprinkler systems, and he was one of the pioneers in that business. He had joined the company. A lot of people don't know it, but the original pop-up sprinkler, lawn sprinkler, was invented by a man from Dayton, Ohio, and my dad joined that company, and he spent a lifetime career in the sprinkler business. And after World War II, after I got home, why I went to join him. He had moved to Texas, and he was working in Houston, and I took the Dallas territory. And so I spent many years putting in sprinkler systems all around Broomfield here. I've got a couple hundred sprinkler systems, I think, around Broomfield. And I think that's how a lot of people know me. You know, we talk about the Rotary. I put a sprinkler system in for Bill Ayers, and helped John Atkinson with his sprinkler system, and I can't think of all of them. Don Mobley, and I can't think of everybody, but I put in sprinklers in Broomfield for about 15, 16 years.
When'd you come to Broomfield?
I moved to Broomfield in 1958, and I wasn't in the sprinkler business at that time. I worked for Boyle's Galvanizing Company, and we had a plant down on Blake Street near 38th, and they built a plant. Well, actually, I was in charge of that too. I was manager of the galvanizing plant, and we built a plant out in Commerce City, still there today, and I worked there for, let's see, up until about 1971. And then I built a plant for a company in Lindsay, Nebraska. They were in the center pivot business, center pivot sprinklers for farms. You've seen all these big, long sprinklers that go in a circle, and when you fly over them, you can see all these circles in the farms. And that's what they call center pivot irrigation systems. And this one company in Lindsay, Nebraska, they wanted me to build a plant for them. So they put me totally in charge, and I built a galvanizing plant there in Lindsay, Nebraska. That was in 1971 and 2. And it was the second largest galvanizing plant in the entire country. And yeah, so I was in that business for about 15 years. But then I came back to Colorado, and I wanted to build a galvanizing plant here in Colorado, and I couldn't raise enough money. That was when the 1973, when the shortage of gasoline, the first gasoline crisis we had. And of course we use natural gas to heat zinc in the galvanizing business. It's a hot dip process. And we couldn't get gas and couldn't get zinc. In those days, actually, when I started out, zinc was 10 cents a pound. And when I started to raise money to build a plant, the price went up to 36 cents a pound. And of course, that tripled what the money that I needed to build a plant. And so I just couldn't raise enough money. And
Can I ask you, how have you been pretty prominent, and have you been involved in Broomfield in all these years?
oh, not prominent, no, not really. But I know a lot of people, and a lot of people know me because of the sprinkler business. I returned to that in 1973, and I actually the first sprinkler system I put in was up on Midway. It was Jody Jonas, Joe Jonas's house there, and that was the first one I put in Broomfield, and it just ballooned from there on out. And I spent the next almost 20 years in Broomfield in the sprinkler business. Of course, I put them in all over Colorado, really. I've got sprinkler systems in Fort Collins and Kremling, some even in Colorado Springs. And I can't think of any other towns around. But I started out in the sprinkler business with my father in Dallas. In those days, we put in 100% copper. All sprinkler systems are nothing but copper and brass and bronze. And actually, I became a pretty good plumber fixing soldering copper. And that was when the first automatic sprinklers were being developed. And well, I had some fellows working on them. We never took out any patents, but we had in those days a hydraulic valve that operated on water pressure. The pressure would close it, and when you release the pressure, it opened the valve, and the water would spread out to all the sprinklers in the lines. And we said, why couldn't we put an electric valve on there somewhere on that line, so it would operate electrically, see? And so we bought little solenoid valves about that big, and we put them on the end of the bleeder line. The bleeder line sometimes ran a couple 100 feet up to the house in big estates. And after we did that for about a year, we thought, well, why do we have to run that line all the way up the house? Why can't we put the solenoid right on top of the valve and operate that way? And so I worked with a couple of friends of mine and had some machinery, what do you call them, screw machines, and milling machines and so forth. And we started putting an electric solenoid right on top of the valve and then running the wire to the house or the garage or wherever we'd hook up the electrical clock. And I don't know if that was the first time that was ever done or not. It was back in 1949, I think. And of course, like I say, we were putting all copper in those days. And that's when the Korean War began, and they rationed copper. So we couldn't get copper, and the first plastic we used was made by Kodak. And they came out with plastic pipe for sprinkler systems, and it was not a standard size. They came out with their own individual size, so you had to buy all the fittings and everything, different sizes, and it got pretty expensive to do that way. And so later, of course, they developed different PVC pipes and so forth, and they made all those standard pipe sizes, what they call IPS or iron pipe size, and you could even connect them to uh, uh, steel pipe and copper pipe and anything like that.
So it all really changed since.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a quick question. We're
Okay.
running out of tape here. Just
Okay. Sure.
what do you think about all the changes in Broomfield since you've been here?
Oh my. When we moved to Broomfield in May of 1950, actually, I bought a house from show home from Lombardi on West 4th Avenue, just a few blocks over here, and I had it built in 1957 on the corner of 4th and Laurel, northeast corner there, and that was in 1957. Transamerica was the developer of Broomfield in those days, and they said within 10 years Broomfield will be 10,000 people. That was 1957. And as you may know, if you've lived here a long time, that didn't happen. We didn't get 10,000 people to, must have been, at least 17 years later, I guess, 18 maybe. And of course now it's 40-some thousand, I think. But it's unbelievable. It was 2,500 when I moved here. And of course it was not incorporated. It didn't incorporate till 61. So, but the Transamerica, and they had their little office right across the street where Bill Airy's dentist's office is right now. And that Lucy Brown worked there. She was a city clerk, and of course when they incorporated, why, she was city clerk. She was was she elected? I don't know. Well, I guess she was elected, yeah. But she's about the only one I remember, really. I got to know Lucy pretty well, and her husband Murray too. And now their children live right a few doors from me, not even a whole block down the street.
We'll get one last question here.
Okay.
We're asking everybody is that since September 11th happened, we're kind of asking everybody to relate their experiences comparing Pearl Harbor and going into World War II versus what we're going into now and getting involved with now, and how you kind of relate the experiences to what you went through.
Well, I don't know. That's kind of hard to see. On September 11th, I usually get up about 6 or before 6 every morning, and about 6:30 or 7 o'clock, I think it was, one of my friends called me on the phone, and he says, turn on the TV and see what's going on. And of course, that's when we saw what was happening, and of course at that point we got to see the second plane fly into the South Tower, I guess it was, and we pretty well realized that they were terrorists as compared to organized, really powerful country attacking us, and we could understand that it was a different situation altogether. In the days of Pearl Harbor, we expected an invasion. We really did, and we had brownouts all over the country, and some of the coastline cities had blackouts, total blackouts, and we were watching for submarines and everything like that. But that didn't occur to us in September 11th. We thought that was just a small group and of haters, you know. Then we didn't really think it was any organized or any country military attacking us. At least that's the way we felt in my family. And we were all up watching it.
How do you think the countries responded?
Our country, our whole country. Oh, I think the response has been very similar, I think, because we all, after Pearl Harbor, why we really got together and everybody just was ready to fight. And I knew I would be drafted. I didn't know when, but I was willing and ready to go. I knew I had to, and I wanted to really. Well, as much as you can, you know. You don't want to leave your family, and you don't want to put yourself in danger. You didn't know what was going to happen really, but it had to be done. We had to go and rid the country of rid the world of these people like Hitler and Hirohito and all that. And so there was no reluctance like in the case of Vietnam, where a lot of people went up to Canada to avoid being drafted or anything. But of course in Vietnam, we didn't know what we were fighting about, really.